recording. So we are in the Torah portion Bo today, which you are going to find in Exodus. So this is the 15th reading from the Torah, is named Bo, which means to come or come. The title comes from the first words of the first verse of the reading, which says, "Then Yehovah said to Moshe, come to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart." Exodus 10:1. The portion begins by concluding the narrative of the 10 plagues, the 10th of which is the slaying of the firstborn. To avoid the plague, the Israelites are given the instructions for the Passover sacrifice and the laws of the feast of unleavened bread. Paro finally consents to let Israel go, and they leave Egypt. So that's our summary of it. So we pick up the story in Shemot, Exodus 10:1, which is the 8th plague, the locusts. So it says, "Then Yehovah said to Moshe, go into Paro, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of the servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Mitzrayites, the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am Yehovah." So Moshe and Aaron went into Paro and said to him, "Thus saith Yehovah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country, and they shall cover the face of the land, so that no one can see the land. And they shall eat what is left to you after the hail, and they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field, and they shall fill your houses, and the houses of all your servants, and of all the Mitzrayites, as neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day they came on the earth to this day." Then he returned and went out from Paro. Then Paro's servants said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve Yehovah their God. Do you not yet understand that Mitzrayim is ruined?" So Moshe and Aaron were brought back to Paro, and he said to them, "Go, serve Yehovah your God." "But which ones are to go?" Moshe said. Excuse me. "We will go with our young and our old, and we will go with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds, for we must hold a feast to Yehovah." But he said to them, "Yehovah be with you if ever I let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No, go, the men among you, and serve Yehovah, for that is what you are asking." And they were driven out from Paro's presence. Then Yehovah said to Moshe, "Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant of the land, and all that the hail has left." So Moshe stretched out his staff over the land of Mitzrayim, and Yehovah brought an east wind upon the land that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts came over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Mitzrayim, such a dense swarm of locusts as had never before been seen, and nor ever will be again. They covered the face of the whole land, so that the land was darkened. And they ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Mitzrayim. Then Paro hastily called Moshe and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against Yehovah your God and against you. Now, therefore, forgive my sin, please, only this once, and plead with Yehovah your Elohim only to remove this death from me." So he went out from Paro and pleaded with Yehovah. And Yehovah turned the wind into a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Yam Suf. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Mitzrayim, but Yehovah hardened Paro's heart, and he did not let the people go. Okay, give me 1 second here. We got to let someone in the door. we go. And something else. Okay, so it mentioned that there were so many locusts that it actually used the word darkness, right? So how does Pharaoh, how does he interpret the events that's going on in front of him?
Annoyance.
I'm sure it was annoying, but I think it was more than that. Yeah. So Moses walks in and he says, "You can't see that your whole country is ruined right now. You're not getting it, right?" Okay. So now he's maybe realizing, yeah, this is a catastrophic event, right? Okay. Um, does he see it as a positive thing?
No.
No, definitely not. Okay. He sees this. There's clearly a judgment going on because he asked Moses to do what?
Intercede for him.
Intercede in prayer with him that he would forgive him that God would forgive him of his sin, right? Yeah, he's always looking for the angle, isn't he? Okay. Sure, I've got it. He could stop. Yeah. Yeah. So he's using what's already in him to get his will done, right? Okay. Okay. So so the plagues from an Egyptian point of view, the plagues were seen as judgments. Okay. And that's not a surprising thing in a polytheistic ancient Near East culture. That events were always seen as the gods were acting upon the world. Okay. So I wanted to focus in on this word darkness for a little bit. We've never looked at this word. So darkness in Hebrew is the word choshek. Choshek, okay? And choshek, it's interesting, even in Genesis, it's seen as a physical thing, okay? It's a, later it becomes a figurative thing. Like I could say that, if I wanted to say evil has come upon the world, but I could say darkness has come upon the world. So I'm using it figuratively, okay? But in darkness, Hoshek is in this story used as a physical thing, okay? So what's the darkest place that you guys have ever been in?
Cave.
A cave.
Oregon Cave.
Oregon caves or Judean caves or Abercrombie caves, those are Australian. They always want to, when they take you on tours, they always get you back in there and then they say, okay, there's no light here, we got to prove it, turn off the lights. And I'm sorry. There's just, you can't see anything because there is no light.
Yeah. My when I was it 16 or 18? 16. I drove my mom back to Montana. Somewhere in Montana, we stopped at some national park or something like this, and they had some cave tunnel type thing. And you walk like a half mile or a mile underground with lights, and then they get you back, and then they show you all the stalactites and the stalagmites and all these things, and it's really cool. And then they same thing. They go, now we're going to turn off the lights and you're going to experience something you've never seen before. And it is as dark as it's just indescribable.
It is, because it's not a little bit of light, it's no light.
Yeah.
There is no light. There's nothing for your eyeballs to perceive.
So, I was thinking this morning, like the dark side of the moon. Right. Except the dark side of the moon still has stars coming in. So if you look the other way from the dark side,
it's going by the sun. It gets sunlight.
Yeah.
But it's dark from us. It's the bad side.
Yeah. So even for the astronauts, they'd still see light, up there, right? So the idea of like a cave or a pit or something like that would be kind of the ancient Near East experience to as much darkness as that maybe you could understand. Or you think about like going out into the desert. So there are places where there aren't, like if you wanted to go somewhere where there's not a lot of light, but so like in Hawaii, I wanted to go up to Mauna Kea, and they have this observatory up there that's just supposed to be spectacular. But the thing is, you still see stars.
Right.
It's not really that dark, right? It's that there's no light around you, so you can see the heavens better, right? Yeah. So this Hoshek, it describes this level of darkness, and it's something that you actually feel. So it says the ninth plague on, so my description, the ninth plague on Egypt was the plague of darkness. It was not normal darkness like that of an eclipse. Right. So if there's an eclipse, you can still see things, right? It's not that dark. This was a supernatural darkness, quote, even a darkness which may be felt. Exodus 10:21. Wow. You could feel the darkness.
Thick darkness.
Yeah.
Like a black fog.
Yeah.
The darkest place I have been is in a dark, very dark room.
Mm-hmm. The darkness persisted for 3 days. Okay. So not even artificial lights and lamps and torches could pierce the blackness. I mean, that would be, so in an ancient Near East culture, that would be the way you'd solve the problem. You get the family torch out and you go walking somewhere, right? They couldn't do that. Now that's weird at that point, right? That's what I'm saying. There's something supernatural about the darkness.
And if I was the Pharaoh, I'd be thinking, why does this not bother me? Because this part was hard. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well, so he keeps getting more and more ticked off,
yeah.
right, when this
It's an
happens.
affront instead of a teaching moment.
Yeah. So, everybody had to stay indoors for the 3-day duration, except the Israelites had light. So there was
So they're walking
darkness here, but light here, right?
How that work?
Was there a wall of darkness?
Right?
Just kind of step through?
Yeah. Dark, not dark. Dark, not dark.
It was Yah going after their sun god?
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. This was an attack on the sun god of Egypt. Okay. And each of the plagues was an attack on at least one or more of these gods. So Moses is just knocking them down left and right.
I was thinking of the Hebrew word because this wasn't the sun god's name.
Ra, yeah. Yep. So Psalm 139:11, this is in the NASB that I'm reading from. It says, "Surely the darkness will overwhelm me, and the light around me will be night." Very possibly a reference to the plague, right? So in the NASB, it starts out, "If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me." So it has this word "if" there. So I want to look at this for just a second. So the question is, if you say "if," that makes it a hypothetical psalm now. Okay. So do we really only imagine a darkness that overwhelms us? So the translator, who is also a reader of Torah, apparently reads the poem as a theological proclamation of God's omnipresence and omniscience. Okay. With the expectation this will be a great comfort to the reader. But we've discovered another layer, a darker layer that's written into the ambiguity of the words. With this in mind, we have to question the hypothetical interpretation that he's making. Okay. So, and we do this through a very small little particle word. It's a single letter, and it's the letter Vav. So Pam, as our junior Bible scholar, what do we translate Vav as? What word is the letter Vav? That's the letter, but we translate it as a word at the beginning of sentences.
Oh,
And correct. and but nor. It's a conjunction, right? Okay. So pass, gold star. I can red ribbon, right? Okay.
But nobody
Um,
else gets one, just me.
They were all telling you the answer.
Oh, I mean, they all get one.
So the vav is attached to the verb amar, to say or to speak, and the translator offers it as the word if.
Oh,
That's odd. Okay.
yeah.
But the conjunctive particle is hardly ever translated this way. It is typically so, then, so that, even so, as well as, but, indeed, from, together, also, with, when, or. In fact, BDB and all of the other lexicons don't even list if as a possible translation. But in this case, they did, and that's NASB, which is supposed to be like a literal translation, right? So, okay, what's going on here? So the usual translation would be "and I say," or oftentimes the vav has this idea of time connected to it. So it would be "when I say," or "then I say," or "even as I say," something on those lines. None of those are hypothetical. Okay. By choosing "if" in that sentence, the author has made it, the translator has made it hypothetical of his own accord. It's not what the text says. So they are all expected human assertions about life. So the poet digs deep into human consciousness and he unearths those moments when we discover ourselves buried in the dark recesses of feeling God's absence. Ever been there? Ever feel God's absence before?
Oh, once or twice.
Yeah. So we still function. Life continues, right? But there's this chasm of emptiness in us. And the inner light that we once knew as joy and peace with the Father is now submerged into the darkness of a pit. And we just sit and navel gaze, like, what's going on? What happened? Why is this happening to me, right? So this is not an imagined possibility and an if conjecture. This is when life turns inside out. What happened to Pharaoh on that day? Life was turned inside out. What happened to every Egyptian that day? What would happen? So we've just went through one of the weirdest years of our lives, right? And everybody's lives got turned inside and out. Okay, in some way, form, or another, right? Okay, yeah. Imagine a darkness for just 3 days. We don't need the whole year. Just 3 days, total darkness. How would that affect everybody? That would have been bizarre. Speaking of bizarre, a flying baby just came by.
Way bizarre. Can you imagine you wouldn't be able to see your phones or your computers?
Not my phone. Your phone. Yeah, exactly. It would go nuts.
People would tweak.
Yeah, for a year, we had our phones. Right? Yeah, so maybe the equivalent today would be, just imagine for 3 days, all phones go down. Like what would the kids do?
Even in Norway in the winter, when it's dark for 3 months straight.
Yeah.
There is a little light.
Yeah.
Yeah, still light. And say, oh, it's
So
not
the Hebrew term hoshek then is used only once outside of the poetic material, but that one exception is crucial for understanding the imagery. It's in Exodus 10:15, the plague of darkness in Egypt. Hoshek is a word about judgment. Gesenius, in his translation, even connects it to the pit, to Hades, to prison, and to judgment. Job 38:2 uses it, and it demonstrates an attempt to hide in the dark without success. In Hebrew history, Hoshek is as real as it gets. There's nothing more real than Hoshek. It is a tangible, felt thing. Okay. But see, when I read this as a millennial English person, and I read darkness, I just go, "Oh, it's dark outside." Yeah, no.
Dark plus existential dread.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Okay.
It says
Exactly.
it says that no one even didn't even get out of their chairs.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's so bad you don't get out of your chair.
I think everybody was born.
Well,
Well,
isn't Hoshek kind
You're
of
welcome to think that, but
an agent of confusion and blindness too?
sure. Yeah. So, what do I experience in wretched emptiness? What happens to me when the darkness within invades my surface posturing? The psalmist detects another presence in the dark, like Sahar, verse 9. This other can only be felt. The dark makes identification impossible. So, why do they not want to get out of their chair?
They probably fall and bust something.
You gonna trip over something and fall and smack into someone else? What's the safest thing to do?
Stay right there.
Stay put, don't move.
Well, if it's an oppressive force, maybe there's a weight to it, you know, you're afraid you can't even stand up.
Sure. So we know that there's someone there in the dark with us, and that in that place where we can see where we can't see our hands before our faces, that isn't even seeable, right?
That would make me terribly claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Ugh.
How many days could you take it? 1 day, 2 day?
That's what I'm saying. You just go insane if it went on too long.
Well, who's cooking the meals?
And you, yeah.
You take care of the baby.
Where's the water, the baby, all these things, right? Okay. And this is the point of midrashing, is that when you read scripture, there's a context and a setting, and what I was taught to do is memorize an event. I'll memorize the order of the 10 plagues, but that doesn't get me anywhere close to understanding what they were actually going through, right? And that's how you make scripture real. Okay. Okay, so let me introduce you to Skip on darkness. So in this, he's coming at it from Psalm 88:12. It says, "Will your wonders be made known in the darkness, and your righteousnesses in the land of forgetfulness?" So little doubt surrounds the meaning of the denominative verb coming from the noun hoshek, darkness. It occurs 18 times, 17 times in poetical books, and then Exodus 10:15 is the only occurrence of hasak in a prose, hoshek in a prose passage. There it refers to the plague of darkness over Egypt. Elsewhere, the word is used to indicate judgment or a curse. The place of Hoshek is Sheol, the place of weakness, disorientation, confusion, and silence. So if you want to know what it will be like when you die, want a little taste of the afterlife, go into your closet, shut the door, turn off the light, and sit there. And don't say a word, not hearing anything from the outside world for, say, 3 hours. Welcome to your coffin, right? Oh, yes, and stop having an inner conversation with yourself while you're there. Because you don't get to, yeah, right, yeah. Think how hard that would be, right? Yeah. So that's why you need a few hours. You have to run out of things to say, even in your own mind, and then you start to understand Hoshek. It's the place where God isn't. So no wonder that the psalmist cries out, "No one can offer praises to you in this place. Lord, no one can speak of your wonders, your mercies, your faithfulness. You get no credit in Hoshek." So don't send don't send me there, Father. I want to praise you. I want to shout your wonders. I want to proclaim your righteousness. But if you send me to Hoshek, all that will be lost. So please, for your own sake, reconsider. Right? So this place of darkness, we can't read it as just it's nighttime. Right? It goes far beyond that. So when that plague hits them for 3 days, they're in Looneyville after 3 days.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Solitary confinement.
Okay. I feel like, yeah. Okay. So I want to stop there and click save on that. We're going to switch over to idolatry now. And we're getting real close to finishing up on idolatry. So hang in there with me, guys. Okay, as promised, we're going to look at emotional theology associated with idolatry. So the nature of the Greek concept of God is that he is a divine principle. Okay. A transcendent, holy other, and an impersonal, removed God. So remember the Greek gods, the Roman gods, these guys, they're all up, in the heavens somewhere, okay, and in the stars, and they're having orgies, and they're doing whatever, they're getting drunk left and right, they're doing whatever they want. They don't care about the humans. The humans are just slaves that they kind of use once in a while and stuff like that. So there's no sense of like a personal God going on there, that like what we grew up with in the church, right?
So it's like a hedonistic law of nature.
It's literally, it's a divine principle. So in the Greek world, the Greeks were all about mathematics. Remember Pythagoras? Okay. So Archimedes, yeah, all of these guys, right? So the Greeks are focused on mathematics and logic, which is just a derivative. And so they create what's called the first principle. So once you establish what the first thing is, I can now build algebra, trigonometry, calculus, all these things based on first principle. Okay. So they take that idea of first principle and they apply it to faith, to religion. So they don't need a personal God. They have a set of doctrinal statements about theology. Okay.
So the system is more important than the person.
Yeah, there is no relation. It's all about the systematic theology is all about first principle. It's based on mathematics, and all of those doctrines just build one upon another. Okay, but you don't have I don't have a personal relationship with the doctrine of the virgin birth.
Right.
It's just a teaching.
I just find it an interesting contrast because it's a very hedonistic, but also very, very separate. So it seems kind of slightly odd.
So ancient Near East, remember that we have supernatural and natural, and they're linked together. The trees have gods, the rocks have gods, the water has God. So the Greeks, because they're looking for certainty in life, and clearly we know that those gods up there, although the pantheon of gods are out of control. Okay, so what they do is they separate those two. So now the gods can have their world, and we have our world. What we want to do now is control our world. Okay, so the stock market goes down and everybody freaks out. Why? Because there's not certainty. Okay, and we were taught that it's all about control. They said if I put my money in the account, it would grow. What happened? It just went down today. And everybody goes nuts, right? And then I come in and buy low, right? So there is a madness to all of that. So the gods are transcendent, other, they're removed, they're dispassionate about us. They don't want a relationship with us, right? We just get things done when they need something done. So the nature of a biblical concept of God yeah, or a Hebraic concept of God is that he is fully emotionally charged and engaged with us. So I remember sitting down having these theological discussions with people in the church, and we're like, well, so do you think God's, is it like a big clock where he just wound it up and set it in motion, and we're just, moving along? Or do you think he actually does miracles today? And, does he interact with us and stuff like that? Well, what they're describing, they're having conversations about is the difference between a Hebraic worldview and a Greek worldview. They just didn't know it, right? So he is fully emotionally engaged, is what Scripture and Torah teaches us, which is why we can find passages about God's anger, his hatred, his intense love, his weeping, his repentance. Torah is filled with all of these emotional words. The New Testament, what's the shortest verse in the New Testament? He wept. Okay? He was an emotional guy. There's nothing wrong with that, right? He saw Lazarus. He heard that Lazarus was dead when he showed up, and it says that he was compassionate, right? And he's supposed to be God's representative on earth, right? So if he's weeping and compassionate, what does that tell us about God? He's emotionally charged into this deal, okay? He's committed. So if we do theology, kind of the Greek systematic theology, we remove all of these things and we just consider them to be anthropomorphic. Do you guys know anthropomorphic? Described or thought of as having a human form or human attributes, deities, stories involving anthropomorphic animals, ascribing human characteristics to non-human things, supernaturalism, beliefs about nature. So I take characteristics of men and I give them to something else.
Bambi.
Bambi. Well, he's not anthropomorphic. He's just morphing. So why do the theologians get rid of these and just call it anthropomorphism? Because we believe in a God of divine principle. And if we start with the position of divine principle, first principle, okay, then you can't have emotions involved in this. So because their God is removed, or their gods are removed from that, right? They're not interested in us, okay? So we have a doctrine that teaches us this. It's called the doctrine of impassibility, okay? So what that says is that God logically cannot feel, okay?
That's not logic.
So that's no logic I want to be part of. So there's a doctrine of immutability. So God cannot change, is what immutability means, changeability, right? Okay, so a feeling is a fleeting, temporary thing, right? I'm happy. Oh, I'm so sad. I changed it like that, right? Okay, so if God can't change, then that means he can't have feelings, because feelings change, right? You follow all that?
Sort of, kind of, yeah.
Okay. So when you look at the Hebrew text, we don't see anything like that in Scripture. Again, we can read, he wept, he cried, he laughed. God does all of these things. He hates, he loves. Those are all feelings, okay? My God is a feeling God, right? But that is not what the church teaches, if you say you follow systematic theology. So I was sitting down with a couple of friends the other night, and I said, do you think God has feelings? This is how you play with everybody, hook them in. You go, do you think God has feelings? Well, yeah, of course God has feelings. I go, can you give me an example in the Bible? Yeah, he wept. Okay, is there an example in the Old Testament? Yeah, God hates, God loves. These are all feelings, Albert. Of course, God. I said, did you know that there's this doctrine called the doctrine of impassibility? And for you to consider yourself or call yourself or agree to the fact that you are a Christian with your point of view, you heretic, you're a bad Christian, because Christianity teaches God does not have feelings. Wait, so I can't call myself a Christian now? What do I call myself now? Oh, my faith has just been shaken a little bit, right? Okay. I go, yeah, I agree with you. God does have feelings. That doesn't, it's not that the Bible's wrong, it's that the doctrine is wrong. Our teaching is wrong, okay? And we just need to own it, right? This is why theologian, even, so, and we'll get into this in a minute. Aquinas was the best at this. So they came up with these theological positions, and everybody reads them today, and theologians will argue about them today, but you will never find a pastor that will teach on the doctrine of impassibility, because no one wants a God that doesn't have feelings. That would be a terrible thing. Oh, wait, we call that an idol, right? Okay, so Torah is filled with all of this imagery about God being betrayed as an adulterous wife. Do we think that that's an unemotional topic? Is betrayal an unemotional event?
Nope.
Oh, yeah, best friend of mine, he betrayed me last week, just totally disloyal and all this. It's a great day. Nothing changed. Still my best friend. Probably not what's really going on, right? So emotional theology, not like idols, is free of nature and fate, but it's essentially involved in emotional connections. God is not subject to nature and fate like idols are, but that does not mean that he's removed from emotional connections with us. So a God who is loved with emotional tenderness can't prevent feelings like the ones we see in the Bible. God is going to be wrathful over the idolatrous relationship of his bride. He's pissed about that. Can I say that? At one point, Yah says, I wished this never happened. There's got to be some emotion involved in there. That's not just a reasoned statement, okay? If that is not emotionally charged language, I don't know what is.
Sorry who created them at all.
Yeah.
So you get rid of them, I'll start over with you.
Right. So he's not Mr. Spock, right? Okay. There's emotion involved in all of this. In fact, at one point he says, I repent of the fact that I even started this whole deal, right? Except I'm committed to her. So I'm going to stick it out, right? I'm sure there's some emotion involved in that. Israel and God are in an emotional, interdependent relationship. It's not just a one-way street. There are obligations on both sides. There are obligations for Israel to respond to God's outpouring of grace and protection and provision and nourishment. God says, if you do these things, I'm going to do these things. He's the one who's been faithful the whole time. So the Garden of Eden. Eden is translated like a delight. Okay, it's the Garden of Delight. Sometimes we'll translate it paradise, right, in the Persian. So here's the story of the Garden of Eden: delight, betrayal, punishment, prohibition, and restoration. A lot of emotion in there, right? So if the burning question in your life is, where did we come from? That's what the Garden of Eden story is all about. Okay, but it's a relational story, right? It's not just a chronological set of events. So scientific naturalism, one of the tenets of the scientific method is detachment. Do you guys remember scientific method in like 7th grade science type thing, right? So the first
stuff they don't do at all anymore.
Yeah, actually use science. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to observe the experiment, right? Okay. But when you observe the experiment, are you allowed to be part of it? No, no, no. I'm detached from it so I can reason out correctly the right events going on. I can measure it correctly and stuff like that. So in graduate school, I had to go through whole classes about the scientific method as part of writing my dissertation, right? And in the dissertation, you would have to list then at the beginning of it all of the biases that you would be bringing to the discussion, okay? That might interfere with the observations. Well, we didn't have the tools to take the temperature and the barometer at the time. So there could possibly be an influence from that. We'll leave that to someone else to do another study, right? We have no idea what the effects of COVID-19 were on the study, blah, 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 right?
Although that often becomes an excuse.
Absolutely, sure. So as far as the Greek worldview is concerned, the world is a stage and I'm sitting in the audience observing it, detached from it, just like the gods. Okay? So that is not possible in the Hebrew worldview. In the Hebrew worldview, I am engaged in the play that's happening on the stage. I'm part of the play. It's not that it doesn't affect you. Well, that doesn't affect me. No, it does affect you, right?
Say otherwise is just
Would be silly. Yeah, it's unfunctional. You just need to admit it, okay? But when I'm attached from it, I can sit back and analyze and draw conclusions. I can create principles from that. I can create a God that is detached and then assign to him attributes that are also detached from me.
Critique everyone else.
Yeah, puts me in the position of power, right? So like immutability, impassibility, eternity, infinity, all of these things have no connection to us. They're not biblical words, okay? So just a brief minute on Father Thomas Aquinas for just a second here. He is the preeminent expert at all of this, okay? He created a book that we call the Via Negativa, okay? It was written in the 12th century, and it's a theological technique saying whatever human beings are, God is not. That's the negative, the way of the negative, okay? So I can prove what God is by proving what humans aren't, okay? So if I am finite, God must be infinite, right? If I'm limited in power, God must be
Unlimited.
omnipotent, all powerful, okay? If I'm limited in knowledge, God must be omniscient, okay? And if I am limited in location, God must be omnipresent, the 3 ohms, okay? None of those are in scripture. That's a theological point of view, okay?
in an overview says it's true, but you can't prove it from just stating it.
Correct. So all of those attributes come out of about as a negation of human beings. And again, in the Greek worldview, what happened is the gods are the good thing in the world. Humans are bad. Okay, so we are the negative of the gods. Okay, so because I am imperfect, God must be perfect. Okay, and so again, like the Hebrew Bible doesn't have a word for perfect. We use perfect to translate some things. All it ever uses is the word whole. you are whole. But see, the Greeks sought after perfection, right? So this is thus Hercules and Atlas and all of their muscles and stuff, and they wanted their physique to look perfect. Okay, the fact that the guy's a complete dunce and couldn't, figure out how to run his life or something, it might be irrelevant, right? He couldn't function in the world. Okay, he can't put his belt together because his muscles are so big, but he looked perfect, right? So we get this Greek idea of perfection that comes into Scripture. So we would call it what's the offering? The whole burnt offering. Sometimes it's used, they'll put it as a perfect offering. But it wasn't, it's not that it's perfect. It's just the whole thing goes up there. That's all it means, right? And all of this can be traced back into the 8th century from the Parmenidean fragment about perfection. So we know where this came from, okay? So I want to read you just a little piece of this about Parmenides. So there was Aristotle and Socrates, right? Okay. So Parmenides comes before them. So this is pre-Socratic method, okay? After almost a century of philosophy based on the general Milesian pattern, so Miles came before Parmenides, okay? Parmenides cast the whole project into doubt by maintaining that the fundamental nature of reality has nothing to do with the world as we experience it. He went much further than Heraclitus in tempering our reliance on the senses. He rejected the senses as entirely misleading and pressed on reason alone to reveal the truth. So truth only comes from logic. Therefore, I need a first principle, and then I can start building my doctrine about religion on first principles. It didn't say that there's objective truth, and that's determined by a God who says this is right and this is wrong, okay? So through his use of unadulterated reason, he came to conclusions about the nature of the world that seemed to suggest not only that the theories of earlier thinkers were utterly unintelligible, but that they were, of course, I would never call my work unintelligible. I would only call other people's work unintelligible, right?
Of course.
But that the very questions they asked were wrong questions to be asking. In so doing, he entirely changed the course of philosophy, demanding new attention for fundamental problems such as the problems of change, immutability, and plurality, and setting the standard for a new, more exacting level of rational argument. Parmenides was born in 515 BC in the city of Elea in southern Italy. There are reports that he was a student of a guy named Xenophanes, and it seemed plausible that the work was in part a reaction to Xenophanes' pessimistic epistemology. There is also some speculation that this was associated with the Pythagoreans at one time. We all love them and their triangles, right? Okay. So two more little sentences here. Like Xenophon, Parmenides wrote in verse. His poem on nature is Homeric hexameters. So yeah, you got 6 syllables in every verse, right? Which in my mind would take a long time to write a sermon. And includes many Homeric images from the book of Homer, especially from the Odyssey. With obvious reference to the poetic tradition, Parmenides begins his poem with the invocation of a divine source. Not God, a source. What's his source? First principles, logic, okay? So there's a direct line of thought from Parmenides to Thomas Aquinas's Via Negativa. How do I know that? Read Skip Mullen's dissertation. Okay, so this is only, it's, what are we at here?
God, time, and
Where's his page numbers? Oh, on the bottom. It's only 330 page doctoral level thesis. Okay, so it's a really light read, like when you're doing nothing in the evening, and you want to learn about Parmenides and Thomas Aquinas. And it's called God, Time, and the Limits of Omniscience: A Critical Study on the Doctrinal Development. So in other words, how did we get to the doctrines that we have today? What got us there? And he takes you through all the steps of the Greek philosophers and how they go directly from Parmenides, pre-Socratic time, to Thomas Aquinas. It's a straight line, okay? But when you look at the Hebrew scriptures, you don't find any of this. None, okay? Yah has all the emotions that we would expect. In fact, the whole idea of adultery is based on an emotional theology. Yah has to have emotions for idolatry to work the way it does in the Hebrew text. So, because remember, idolatry is spiritual adultery, okay? So all the feelings associated with adultery is the same thing that God feels when we're focused on other gods or non-entity things like first principles, okay? Otherwise, what does wrath mean for a God who can't feel? Those plagues, when darkness came down, that came down because of a feeling God had, okay?
How can you say I'm a jealous God? My name is jealous.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So what does betrayal or humiliation mean then to God? What does honor or love? These are all, they have feelings attached to them, right? Did that already. Let me see where I'm at in my notes. Okay, so theologians talk about these doctrines, immutability, impassibility, things like this, but no one preaches on it because no one would want a God without feelings. Okay,
So it's a theology they espouse but don't believe.
They would say they believe it, but
they
actions
espouse it.
speak
They
louder than
espouse it.
words.
Yeah, they espouse it. They say this is our theological statement, but in reality, that's not what they actually believe or what they do.
So like when I was talking with my friends, see, I started out with, do you think God has feelings? Right. Okay, so on step one, because I already know where I'm going with this set of questions, right? On step one, I got them to agree with, right? They've already agreed with me, and I go, did you know that the church actually teaches this? So now their problem is, what do I do with the church? Because I didn't realize I didn't agree with that, right? Yeah. So now what's really funny, I've known them for a couple of years now, and they're really intrigued trying to figure out what this whole Hebrew thing is. And I've said enough of this to them now, and they'll listen to messages either at church or online from different pastors that they like and stuff like that. And they've noticed this similarity with all of them now. He says, they all keep saying, in the Greek it says,
yeah.
But I never say that. I say, because I got them to buy into context.
Right.
I said, don't you think it's important that we read this in context? Oh, absolutely. Scripture always should be read in context. Okay. So it only matters what it meant to the first audience, right? Then I can start making interpretation. And later I can go to Midrash and stuff like that. But what matters is, what did it mean to them? Because words change, right? Mm-hmm. Words evolve and because of culture and all these things. And they bought into that early on, right?
Well, because it's an unassailable truth.
Yeah, and honestly, I got it from the Navigators course. Okay, and John Walton, who's a professor emeritus at Wheaton University, right? They are they're Christian authorities and teachers agree with this. Okay, so they bought into that early on, and they're always asking me context questions then, right? And what does this mean? What's the Hebrew word? Well, now every time they listen to a sermon, what they hear is, well, the Greek says this. And Nita then yells out, Well, what does the Hebrew say?
Mhm.
Right?
Especially like with Matthew and Mark and Luke, which are all in Hebrew. We're all written in Hebrew.
Yeah. Well, the church wouldn't know that today, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can tell you what those say, right?
You can look it up.
Okay. So, in fact, from a Hebraic perspective, that kind of unfeeling God is actually what we call an idol. Okay. A God who can't feel, hear, eat, speak, or think for that matter. Okay. You remember Eliyahu at Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal, right? Well, maybe your God's indisposed over there or something. Maybe if you cried out a little louder, you might get him to come back, right? Well, he mocks and he ridicules that kind of God. Why? Because he understands that idols are completely impervious to the requests of men. They're just hunks of rock and stone. Okay, so what about Hebrews 13:8? Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Right? We've all heard that verse.
Sure.
Could you pull that first curtain halfway closed? Or I'm getting a reflection here. What must that verse mean then in a Hebraic worldview? Okay, there's two forms of immutability: strong and weak. So Aquinas advocated for a strong immutability. And by the way, so did Maimonides, who was Jewish, a Jewish rabbi, right? It says that if it's not logically possible for God to change. Okay, that's strong immutability. Therefore, any attribution of change to God is an impossibility. So weak immutability means that God's character never changes. In other words, he will always be gracious and loving and compassionate and merciful. His behavior or his expression of emotion, those attributes, those things can change. Okay, so he says, if I pray that Yah might repent of this action and do something else. Well, yeah, so he can repent. He can change his actions, right? Say that again.
Hello.
I missed that. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I believe in strong immutability, then I have to say that it's not true, that it's anthropomorphic. That's how I get around it. Then I say this: God already knew ahead of time what was going to happen. And since he already knew ahead of time what was going to happen, it was for the prophet's benefit that he said it, because he already knew what they were going to say, and his plans never change. This starts sounding a lot like Calvinism and Arminianism and predestination and all of these issues that we made up, right? Exodus 34 gives us a very clear list of his unchangeable character traits. So how they get applied to individual circumstances changes all the time. Otherwise, there's no reason to believe that prayer works.
So,
Well, he has to interact with us.
hello.
Mm-hmm.
His response to us might be different.
Correct. Based on myriads of factors, right? That many people watching may not even know anything about, right? Okay. Yeah. So today the church confuses strong immutability with weak immutability. And when we talk about God never changing in Hebrews 13 there, our vocabulary slops back and forth between strong immutability and weak immutability, just like having a conversation with an evolutionist, that microevolution and macroevolution get thrown back and forth and no one recognizes terms got switched. And you can't have a conversation anymore with it, right?
I always bring that.
Yeah.
In that conversation, I always say, microevolution absolutely occurs.
Sure.
There's no question.
We can actually prove it.
We actually, you
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
But macroevolution.
We have no proof for that, right? Okay. So without realizing it in that conversation, we're making logical mistakes, switching vocabulary there. So we end up with a Greek God that is transcendent from the universe, and there is no possibility of his interaction with us. That's what systematic theology gives us. And that's fine with the Greek-based theologians, because that's the kind of God they have, a divine first principle. That's all they need to get it started. Okay. And then all they do later, Catholic Church comes along, all they do later is they just go, oh, the divine principle is God. Except now I got all this systematic theology in place that doesn't add up like that. There's no fruit that comes from that. And then they draw boxes around their doctrines, and they have certainty because everything fits in their boxes. And we're all happy now, right? Except for a few squirrely little verses that give us clues today. That can't be right. And then people go around and start searching this stuff down. How did we get here? How did we believe in this stuff, right? As the proverb says, everything sounds right until another man shows up. And you go, oh, wait, there's another point of view here, right? Okay, so how do we resolve all this stuff? A biblical phenomenological or phenomenon as it appears view versus a Greek analytical view. So the Greek view is everything is a nice little Christmas gift wrapped up in a nice little package. Your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed. It's all in logical order. And it makes the verse fit what the theology says. Okay. The biblical or phenomenological view says that you start with the verse and understand it and build on the verse, right? Not start with your position and find a verse to proof text it. Oops. 1 second here. Oh, that wasn't bad. Okay. So so last night I entered into this, I went over to a friend's house, entered into this deep discussion about discipleship. And give me 1 second here.
Hello?
Okay. So we're
Sorry.
no worries. We're sitting down having this discussion about discipleship, and I asked a very simple question: who discipled you?
The church.
Did they?
Well,
Nope.
disciple.
Okay, so now pause it. You're already backpedaling when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in my case, I can say really clearly, my karate instructor discipled me in karate. So I spent 30 years with him, walking behind him everywhere he went, okay, doing everything he did, learning how to talk to customers, how to teach people, how to analyze kata, all these different things. And I was right there. I'd go to nationals with him. He taught me how to lead groups of people. He did all these different things, right? He actually discipled. In the Coast Guard, you were probably discipled to do certain jobs, right? You actually taught how to do them. This is your duty. And if this happens, you do X, Y, and Z. There's a protocol to follow, and you had to know that protocol. So that's kind of like discipleship then, right? Okay. So who discipled us in the church? Now maybe parents.
Yeah, I was just saying
Okay.
parents.
So they taught us certain things, as they did about life, right?
Our Sunday school teachers. Yeah, kind of decide, when we.
More short-term
Sunday
basis.
school, yeah.
So in our Greek worldview, that now becomes our definition of discipleship. Is that the definition that the Bible uses?
No.
Likely not.
Probably not. You know me well enough. It's just not going to be, right? Yeah. So there's this saying about the dust of the rabbi's sandals. Okay. So you remember when Yeshua goes along and he collects all of his guys on his team, right? And they're walking along. Typically, they're all walking in a straight line. They're following him. Okay. And there's a pecking order to that. Okay. The smart guys second. Okay. And the idiots in the back. Okay. And so the person who is second in line, right? When as the rabbi's walking, his sandals in the dust, he's kicking up dirt on the guy behind him. That's how close you were supposed to be. You're literally like right up against his back walking with him, because you want to do everything he does and not miss out on anything, right? That's Yeshua's version of discipleship. Now, who was it in the church that did that for you? Now it doesn't fit anymore, right? Yeah. So we're all sitting around discussing, well, who did disciple me? And generally speaking, when you find people that are on fire for God, my experience has been they discipled themselves. God grabbed onto them and they chased down the answers, right? So what were Yeshua's last words to us to do on this planet before he left? What's his last command? Go ye and make disciples of men. What's the one thing we're not doing today?
Go ye and make disciples of men.
Yeah. So and understand when it says go ye, it's actually not an imperative word. Okay, it's not a command. What it actually says is, while you're going, make disciples. So it doesn't say make a special trip. Don't create an evangelistic movement in your church to go take care of whatever. Okay. What it says is, while you're going, live your life, and things will naturally come up on your vacation where you will start talking to people about me. Don't be afraid to do that. I'll help you remember everything you need to remember. Okay. So, I run off to Hawaii and I walk into this hut and I have this 20-minute discussion with this Hawaiian kid about the law, both the Hawaiian law, which oddly looks mysteriously a lot like the Torah, right? And so the word law, what's the word for law again? Paku, hakalaku. Help me, Wendy, if you're there. It's where we get the word taboo from. Okay, so it's all the things you can't do.
Kapu.
Kapu. Thank you.
It's kapu.
Kapu. So that's
You're welcome.
the law. Okay. And so we're sitting there having this discussion about the law. I didn't plan that discussion, but while I was going, I heard this noise and I thought I should go see what's inside that hut. And here's this guy sitting there making a drum, old school style, with an adze, right? And we ended up having, it was just a wonderful discussion, right? But I'm not like, okay, I woke up this morning, I'm gonna go evangelize someone, smack them over the head with the Bible and make them into a believer, right? Yeah, I'm gonna go pass out tracts to. It's not what it said, because so what's the end result in our culture when we do that? We annoy people and then they don't want to listen to us, right? Yeah. Okay. So we're sitting down kind of discussing discipleship and all of this and ups and downs that we've had with all these things. And the reason we don't disciple, okay, we focus on seeker sensitivity and all these different things today, right? Is that it doesn't fit our nice tidy boxes. Okay, all of our nice tidy whiteys, right? Because if you're going to disciple someone and you're going to be this close to them, it's going to be messy. Okay, you're going to follow. So imagine this: you're going to follow me around side by side for the next 3 years, learning, listening, questioning, crying, laughing, and experiencing how you live a Torah life. There's going to be ups and downs. You're going to be mad. You're going to be happy. A lot of emotion all involved. What? The church lied to me? Okay, yeah, I was angry for about 4 years when I discovered that I was a false prophet too. Okay, and I had a lot of stuff to work through in there, right? The positive model I was lucky to have was my karate instructor. He actually just, brought me along everywhere he went. And I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is how you do a demo. This is how you do this, that type of thing. But I didn't get it from the church. So in regards to the Bible, I read it. I may not be able to make sense of all of it, but I trust God's character. And since I trust God's character, I know I can count on him. And the word in Hebrew, the word for trust, it means reliability. If I trust in God, it means I can rely on him to follow through on what his promises are. It says, trust Jehovah with all your heart. I mean, you put your confidence in his reliability. Consumer Report says 5 out of 5 Hebrews rate God's reliability at 100%. We all trust him, right? So the biblical model, emotions and narrative versus reason and principles. Reason and principles are the Greek view, right? A living story versus a collection of objects and events. Personal versus symbolic. Acts versus abstractions. A closed society, those grafted into it, versus an open society where I embrace the tolerance of a multi-ethnic, multi-divinity, whatever, everything's accepted. God's values versus culture's ever-changing values. Sacraments, moral values, versus scientific explanation, utilitarian purposes. Okay, last section here. Idolatry is a lifestyle. So idolatry is a complete form of life. It is not just, I made a mistake in this one area. Okay. Idolatry is an embracing of a whole world view. It offers answers to life's questions. It provides instructions for living, how to make money, how to get a job, what is important in life, and it tells you the priorities in your work world. It covers everything. So Judah came to me last week. We had lunch, and about 2 weeks before that, I was in prayer one morning, and I was like, I really need to talk to Judah about jobs, about getting a job, or like, I don't know what it is, but there's something I need to talk to him about, a job. And so we sat down, we're having lunch, and he goes, so I wanted to share something kind of odd with you. I'm working at Toxic right now and stuff, having a great time, making a lot of money and stuff, and they're bringing him on as a leader, to do these things. Everything's great. And he says, and then I got this fortune cookie at Panda Express. And I go, okay, so, I've went through this large swing. So I would have, 10 years ago, I would have went, that's a fortune cookie, don't ever touch it. Now I kind of realize, God can use anything, right? So I should listen. I'm not just going to like kick him in the knee or something like that. And so I go, okay, what did the fortune cookie say? And it said something to the effect of like, don't waste your life on stupid jobs or doing stupid things or something like that, right? And so he's looking and he's like, do I really want to be a welder? He's looking at, going to LCC and do this welding thing and stuff. And I thought he would apply it to Toxic. Yeah. See, that's where my brain went, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. Wow, that's really interesting. I go, so 2 weeks ago, I was in prayer. I felt like God wanted me to tell you something about jobs. So here's what I want to share with you. The Greek worldview is, what do I want to do with my life? Okay. The Hebraic worldview is, what is God calling me to do? So whatever you do in your life, it's not about you. It's about what God's calling you to do. And if you can tell me God's calling me to do X, Y, and Z, I will support you through hell. as long as you can tell me you believe God's calling you to do this. But just because you're good at it, or just because you got mad skills at it, or whatever, or it's you'll make a lot of money at it or something like that. I said, doesn't matter to me. That's not what's gonna. But if you can say, I know I'm in God's will right now. God is calling me to do this, and He looks at me and He goes, I totally agree.
Woohoo.
And I'll start praying about that. I'm like, great,
Cool.
good conversation, son. High five. Boop. good father son moment there. So the idea is just that we're always putting God first in everything that we do, and idolatry removes Him from that position, right? So now I'm focused on the money, I'm focused on the prestige, the power, whatever, right? So what emphasis it teaches us what emphasis to put on every aspect of our life to keep our life in balance. Idolatry provides a purpose and a hope. If those are not provided by God, then they must be provided by an idol. Make sense? Dare I say that Yah's way of doing things is different than the world's way of doing things?
Yeah.
You've experienced that too? So anything that replaces Yah's full way of living becomes an idolatrous lifestyle. Sabbath, feasts, tzitziot, clean and unclean diet, adultery. Pick your commandment, right? Yah laid out a whole cultural way of being in the world. And where we embrace living in a way not in the format of the culture Yah laid out is idolatry. So we're pushing towards an idolatrous lifestyle when we make these other choices. Idolatry is also cognitive, okay? It's not just betrayal and disloyalty. It's also the possibility of worshiping a false god as error. So I could make a mistake. I didn't know his name was that, right? No one ever taught me that. I always thought it was Yahweh. Okay, so I didn't know that. Okay, that's a cognitive error, right? But sometimes idolatry in the Bible is used in the sense it's just rebellion. Okay, you're actually worshiping a false god. Okay, so in the Bible there are people not in the covenant with God who worship other false gods. The Gentiles, right? So do you remember in Jeremiah 30, 31 or 33? Maybe it's 32. It's one of those. And it talks about the new covenant. Who's the new covenant made with? House of Judah and the house of Israel, right? Yeah. Where are the Gentiles in there? They weren't, right? They get grafted in, okay? But they weren't part of that covenant. So if they're worshiping something, they're worshiping a false god. That's idolatry, okay? But if you're in the covenant and now you commit spiritual adultery, okay? So if you're in the covenant, that's a cognitive error now, okay? So the Gentiles were never part of Yah's covenant relationship. They can't be worshiping a false god on the basis of betrayal. They didn't betray anything. That's why they're called idolatrous, because they fall into a cognitive error. They worship the wrong God, not because they make a mental mistake. They worship the wrong God because they are rebellious against what Yah revealed in the beginning. This is what Romans chapter 1 is all about. This changes the marriage analogy, and belief becomes an internal and cognitive thing. Idolatry switches from alien rituals to alien beliefs. Now it's about what you think. Remember at the beginning, we said that idolatry in the ancient Near East is associated with rituals and practices, right? It was mostly fertility cults, okay? But idolatry can also be associated with beliefs. Now it becomes internal and personal to me rather than how I practice religion. It's orthodoxy instead of orthopraxy, okay? So if I was part of the covenant community and I betray that loyalty to my God, then that's adultery, right? Spiritual adultery, idolatrous lifestyle. If I was never in the covenant community, God says he still reveals enough of himself in creation to them for them to know better, to be rebellious. So they make the mistake of worshiping the false God in rebellion. Not because they walked away from the marriage, they were never married to him. Okay. They were never part of the marriage, but because they wanted to fornicate. Again, fertility cults. Okay. So this is why years ago, when I first started teaching, I talked a lot about the two houses. One was an adulterer and one was a fornicator. The prophets say this too. Okay. It's not the prophets say it too. They said it first. I just picked up on it. Okay. So in our culture today, there's hardly any concern over ritual and practice. Even even generally, when I talk to Christians, if I were to say, I keep Sabbath on Saturday, they don't really care. They won't argue with me about that. Okay.
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So why? Because most people are practicing mental idolatry today. Okay. They don't interact with hardly any of the commandments that Yah put in place or care about them inside the covenant community because they are already outside of the covenant community, right? So that is an error of mental idolatry. It's about their beliefs. They are disconnected from Yah's way of life. And the only way that they can be corrected is through teaching. And that it's an extremely long process, as we've all experienced. You cannot go to someone and say X, Y, and Z, and they're going to go, oh, I'll change my whole life.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen, okay? Because they're so deeply connected to the systematic theology. And I've been doing this 10 years, and I'm still barely just scratching the surface of this stuff. Right? And is this not what Paul Shaul says about the Gentiles? He doesn't talk to the Gentiles about their idolatrous adultery. That's a conversation he has with his own people. Okay, he talks to the Jews about idolatrous adultery. He talks to the Gentiles about their mistaken belief in the wrong God. Okay, the emphasis is on knowledge. Then you have to teach the Gentiles. Exactly. Concepts are just floating around here, and there's nothing concrete to hold on. Okay. With the exception of Jonah, okay, most of the prophets are sent to the community that has walked away from its relationship covenant with God. Who was Jonah sent to?
Gentiles.
The Gentiles, Nineveh. That's right. In the New Testament, Paul communicates to them the knowledge they need to correct their mental error in their behaviors. Once they get into covenant of marriage with Yah, if they walk away, then he goes after them for their idolatrous ways. Okay, thus the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, right? So the Gentiles were grafted in. Once you're grafted in, you're no longer a Gentile. Now you're part of the community of faith. And so now I'm going to hold you accountable to these standards. So in our contemporary idolatry now, the pillars are the truth resides in the individual. Remember back in like the 80s and 90s, it was a huge discussion in the church and commentators, philosophy, news, all these things about objective and subjective truth, right? Well, this is the end result of it. The end result is that truth now resides in the individual. So we all joke about there being 39,000 different denominations, But the truth is there are millions of denominations, because it means to me whatever it means to me, and that's okay if it doesn't mean that to you and you. It's my own version of Christianity now, because truth resides in me, and it's what I say it is. And we see this all over culture today. But it's not just a cultural issue, it is an idolatry issue. Okay. Any culture that worships truth residing in the individual is going to be an idolatrous culture. Truth resides in God. Okay. Nowhere else. Okay. So we will pick up there on idolatry, contemporary idolatry, and more about resolution next week. And again, I would encourage you, if you have time, go get Skip's book and put yourselves to sleep every night reading this. Let me think if there was anything else going on. Ruth, have you got your results yet? Can you share that?
I have not gotten the results yet.
All right. So Ruth, there was a patient out at, not patient, a community member in her apartment complex that had COVID that she was exposed to. So
Confirm.
Confirmed, yeah. So she had to go down and get that. Say that again.
There's two confirmed now.
Oh, now 2 confirmed.
And so I suspect there's more like 4 or 5.
Uh-huh.
Get them to take vitamin D and vitamin C.
That's right. Yeah.
Already been doing that. I have no symptoms.
So you're doing well. That's good. Again, watch lots of funny movies and laugh a lot. Build your immune system.
That's what I kept telling him. I wasn't going to get it because I laughed too much.
There you go. Was there anything else? I feel like there was something else I was going to mention.
We're on for tomorrow, right?
Oh, thank you. Hebrew tomorrow. Yes and no. There was a scheduling conflict. Let me look what it was. What time did we do that one?
11.
11 we were doing it.
I am so
Last
smart.
year we did it at 2. But
Okay.
yeah.
When I looked at it, I thought, oh my gosh, I double booked. Okay, so if we're at 11, I'll probably need to duck out like 5 minutes early. So, but we'll be on it at 11. Fine. I will do penance by eating extra popcorn.
Oh, okay. Got to eat a lot.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining me today and hanging out with me. Hope you guys have a great Shabbat for the rest of your day, and Shavua Tov. Have a great week.
All right.
Take care.
You too, Albert. Thanks, Albert.
Hey guys. Mahalo, Albert.
Mahalo.